Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Brady, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Matt Scott. Now, the tables are turned on me a little bit today because we're actually going to do a wrap-up episode on my crossing of the African continent. So we talk about my experience with the INEOS Grenadier, if I had any issues with the vehicle, the things that I learned, maybe the things that I would do differently. Certainly the equipment that worked well for me, but more importantly, the lessons that I learned personally, the experiences that I had with the people that I traveled with, the mistakes that I made and the lessons that I learned from that. So this is an overview of the trip across Africa. But there's also some other places that you can find out more about the trip. So in Overland Journal magazine, we have the entire series of the crossing of Africa. Going into the magazine, there's several installments already in the back issues. So if you subscribe, you'll be able to continue to get those crossing continent updates in the magazine. And then we also, on our YouTube channel, our Expedition Portal YouTube channel, we have the entire Africa crossing series. So it includes taking delivery of the vehicle in the UK. There's another episode on how I prepared the vehicle for the trip. It's 40 minutes of every single bag that I brought along, all of the equipment, why I chose what I chose for the crossing of Africa. And then we've got multiple installments already up on YouTube, and eventually they'll all be there as well. So please enjoy those additional installments on Africa and my conversation with Matt about crossing Africa.
And special thanks to Overland Explorer Vehicles, also known as OEV, for their generous support of this week's podcast. The OEV is one of the most respected camper builders in our industry, using premium four-season construction and the highest quality components to manufacture campers capable of traveling around the world. Even the Overland Journal podcast host Ashley Giordano uses one of their tray model pop-up units on their Tundra for traveling throughout Europe and Northern Africa. From the composite panels, aluminum exoskeleton, and even their own aluminum tray beds, OEV is built to last your next overland journey. Oh, well, it's so good to be back. I've done a couple podcasts now since returning, but get to sit down and chat with my buddy now.
Yeah, we're going to talk Africa today, and I think it's important. There's been a lot of podcasts on specific legs of the trip. What we're doing with this one is we're talking about, the entire thing. So, Cape Town to Djibouti and all of the adventures in between. And also, I guess we're going to start with building the car.
Yeah, talk about how the car performed, my overall impressions, because again, this trip wasn't sponsored by INEOS. We paid our own way. So they basically they gave us an extremely generous long-term loan of the vehicle. Yeah. And so I'm beyond grateful for that. But the goal with that was that, INEOS was very confident that the vehicle could do it. I was very curious to see if it could. So it was a great melding of, motivations between INEOS and myself and Overland Journal. So we were able to get access to unit number 372. So it's about as early.
Very early.
It's about as early as you can get in a production variant of the car. And we started in Durban, and it had a couple thousand kilometers on it, most of which I put on it in the UK.
Yeah, so I guess you actually, the journey really started in the UK, because you had the vehicle in the UK for like a week or two.
I did, and I drove it around, drove it to the coast. Went and saw like Mac McKinney, a bunch of great folks, and just really put some miles on it. And then I also had the time to take it to, I think it's called the Millbrook Proving Grounds, which is a sister proving grounds to the Milford Proving Grounds for GM. So it was designed to work pretty much in the same way. So very effective testing ground for four-wheel drive vehicles, and of course high-speed cars and sports cars and everything else like that. But it gave me the chance to really run the vehicle through the paces. I also was able to spend some time with some of the product engineers to really make sure that I understood how all of the systems worked.
Yeah.
Because there are some things that you need to be mindful of, like just usually around button pushing and stuff like that. But I was able to really I had some failed hill climbs and some deep mud and all that other stuff, deep water crossings with it as well. So that was really helpful. and then drove it to the Grenadier pub, which was technically the beginning and what will be the end. So
cool. It's a really nice place, actually.
Yeah, because you've been there.
I've been there like 10 times now.
So the last time that you were at the Grenadier pub, did they still have all the scaffolding on the outside, or was that down yet?
I'm trying to think. I was there last time I was there when I was at Goodwood Revival Race with my buddy, and no, I don't.
Yeah, because it had scaffolding all over it when I was there for the start. So it'll be fun to get there like after it's been repainted.
It's a cool place. It's almost a little bit of an adventure to find.
It is. It's tucked back in a little alley, dead end alley.
Yeah.
So and it's still very popular with the locals. It's becoming more popular now that it's got kind of a bit of cachet to it. But
yeah. It's really cool. The food's actually pretty good too.
It was. I was surprised by that. It was the first time I'd ever had beef Wellington.
Oh, they're known for their beef Wellington.
And it was like,
it's quite good.
It's like, let's take a fairly well-cooked steak or roast or whatever they use, and then let's bread it and fry it. And that was like, oh, that was kind of good.
You know, I like English food, but it's maybe not something that I would eat every day.
I think that would be
there's something very special about pub food.
Yeah,
you
for
know,
sure.
It holds a very sentimental place in my heart, but I don't know if I could eat it's a lot of
friedness.
I mean, like, to be fair though, like typical American food's also pretty shit.
Yeah, that's true. Not very good.
Like ooh, cheeseburgers, steak. Wow,
you wouldn't want that every day.
Potato.
You wouldn't want that every day.
You know, just thank God for Mexico.
Yes,
like
exactly.
thank God for immigrants bringing like
spices,
because otherwise we'd be eating like 1950s Dwight Eisenhower food. So you started there. You put the. Did you ship it row or in a container?
It was actually roll on, roll off because it was still. We were able to ship it as what would be classified as a new car.
Okay, cool.
So it actually went on the same boat that other Grenadiers went on to go to South Africa, and it was cool actually when I picked it up in Durban because I went to like their main processing center in this place called Camperdown, and I roll in there and there were hundreds of Grenadiers, which was just
cool.
Like lines and lines and lines of Grenadiers, and that was actually the first time that I recognized that the rear springs on the car that I was driving was very different from the springs that were on the cars in Africa. So we'll talk about that in a little bit because it was something that we ended up changing on the vehicle. But yeah, so then, I mean, really, I also didn't want to over-modify the vehicle. I didn't want to complete the trip and someone say like, oh, of course you did it because you had a lift and you put 35s on it or whatever. I did nothing to the car.
It was like an afternoon of stuff.
Exactly. You could remove all of the modifications that were done to the vehicle, which were literally just bolt-on accessories for storage and for sleeping. You could remove all of them in about 45 minutes.
Yeah.
So there was a roof rack, which was essential for carrying fuel, and then there was a platform in the back that was essential for sleeping inside the car. And those were the only two modifications done to the vehicle.
Because you had a petrol or gas powered car, and then you brought, I think it was like 2 jerry cans with you.
And 2 18-liter giant loop fuel bladders.
Okay.
And that was enough for me to, for those that are listening, like a key consideration around remote international overland travel is that you want to have a vehicle that's capable of 1,000 kilometers of range. Yeah. If you can go a little bit better than that, that's good. There are places where you need more than that, like the canning stock route in Australia. But I think you want to be looking at that around 1,000 kilometers of range, which if you look at like a 78 series Land Cruiser with the twin 90-liter tanks, voila, you're there, right from the factory. And so that's very common to see those NGO rest of the world vehicles with the capability of doing 1,000 kilometers of driving. And that it's not only just because like, oh, I've got to go 1,000 kilometers between fuel stations. It's what I experienced on the trip is that there is sometimes just not fuel available, period.
Yeah.
So for example, in Malawi, which we did talk about that before, but I had to go over 1,000 kilometers, 1,040 actually is exactly what I drove between fuel stops.
Wow.
So
you needed it.
I needed it, but I didn't need it all the time, which is that's kind of the beautiful thing about those fuel bladders, is that otherwise I would have had 4 jerry cans permanently strapped to the top of the vehicle, whereas what I ended up with was only 2 jerry cans and then 2 of those rollable fuel bladders.
Interesting. Because I think we have to be balanced with the Grenadier, and from my perspective, maybe one of the areas that could have done better was fuel range.
True, and it needs to just be an option. So, for example, like also to within the scope, if you were to compare a Prado to a Grenadier, or a standard issue 200 series Land Cruiser to a Grenadier, they all have the exact same size fuel tank.
Yeah, but they have the ability of auxiliary fuel tanks.
That's right. That's right. And that's where the key comes in, is just making it an option, or maybe in part of a package, to have somewhere around, get it up to around 130 liters.
Yeah.
And 130 liters is actually what you get when you purchase a 76 series Land Cruiser.
They have the
with
bigger tank.
With the bigger tank. So, and it's just a single 130 liter fuel tank. So I don't really think that you could get 130 liters into the stock location, because it actually already hangs down a little bit low. The one skid plate that was beat on the Grenadier was the fuel tank skid plate. Okay. It never failed. I never had a puncture or anything like that, but there's nothing straight about it anymore on the underside, and there's no powder coating left, and that's just because of miles and miles and miles and miles of mud and ruts and deep sand. It was just constantly scraping on that skid plate.
I think one of the things, again, one of the things with extending your fuel range in the aftermarket is that it is, at least in the United States, technically illegal on a gasoline vehicle.
That's right.
So with a diesel, you can throw these big honking aftermarket fuel tanks in them,
right?
And it's completely fine because diesel doesn't evaporate.
Right.
Gasoline,
much slower rate of evaporation.
Yeah, much slower. Yeah, gasoline evaporates pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And there are, evap containers, there are controlled emissions systems tied to the size of your fuel tank.
Right.
And you cannot permanently store fuel even in a transfer capacity. It has to be a temporary fuel storage. So that's where you see people using jerry cans or whatever. That's fine because it's considered temporary. So, with all of these long range fuel tanks that you see being sold in the U.S., just know that
off-road use only.
They're off-road use only, and it would be interesting to look up. But I believe the last time I looked it up, it was a $250,000 EPA fine.
Sure.
Similar to deleting the emissions on a diesel truck or something like that. So to have that available would just be kind of like maybe the chef's kiss on top.
It would be nice.
The Grenadier.
For most people that are going to use the Grenadier in the USA, having 90 liters is going to be plenty.
Yeah.
So, and it's interesting. One of the things that I observed was that the rated fuel economy on the vehicle isn't great, but I was able to get much better than that in all conditions. But when I was in Malawi, for example, I was being very careful to drive slow and smooth. And I was getting 11 liters per 100K, which is
really good.
Over 20 miles per gallon.
Yeah.
So, it's just, and at times even a little bit better than that. So because the Grenadier is such a squared off body, it really is affected by higher speeds. So if you just kind of keep at lower speeds, you'll be shocked at how much better the fuel economy will get. That was my experience.
Yeah. So you just basically did to go back to the modifications, you did a front runner roof rack.
Yep.
You did some not even drawers, just like a platform in the back.
That's right, an aluminum platform. It was a custom thing. They may offer it in the future, front runner, but they were just very generous and helpful and put one of their engineers on helping me do that.
Cool.
And they welded it out of aluminum. The frame was only 8 kilograms. There was a little bit more weight in the wood top. It was carpeted for kind of comfort and for appearance. And then it was hinged so that way you can fold the sleeping surface back on top of the load surface and then actually use the rear seats. So I kept it where it was multi-use just in case we needed to do that. And I slept in it dozens and dozens and dozens of nights, including many nights in a row at the Djibouti border. But then front runner boxes slide underneath.
Yeah, just those little, I think they're actually kind of like South African ammo cans that they've kind of done their own riff on.
Very similar, and 4 of them fit underneath.
Yeah.
Had the kitchen stuff, had some spares and some tools.
Yeah, I like your approach on this trip with sleeping inside of the vehicle. If not just to say, because staying in lodges and Airbnbs in Africa is so cheap.
So cheap.
On all the stuff that we've always done, you generally end up paying for camping because depending on where you are at, if you're in a desirable area, a game park or whatever, you generally want to be in a fenced area, and that comes with cost. I know that you did some stuff in Tanzania that was open in the Serengeti.
That was one of the most memorable and incredible camping experiences of my life, was to get one of these special campsites, and there's no fence, there's no bathroom. You pull up underneath an acacia tree and surrounded by wild animals. It was incredible. And
to be clear, lions are like raccoons in the Serengeti. There are a lot of them.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would do that.
And I'm so proud of Tavia, because she was like, okay.
Yeah, talk about throwing her to the deep end. Dude.
I know. Yeah. She didn't have a passport until the trip, and her first stamp was from South Africa. And, she's just an amazing nurse. All day long, she takes care of medically fragile children. So that's why she's so good for me.
Yeah.
But it was just incredible to literally throw her in the deep end, and she thrived. And, admittedly, even for me, being camped in the middle of the Serengeti, when it was time to try to go pee in the middle of the night, you're taking your flashlight and all you see is eyes. Everywhere you point the flashlight.
Yeah.
So I grabbed my Maasai warrior club, and I got out of the car, and I kind of moved my way very closely to the vehicle, around to the other side, and opened the door and stood there, kind of like Maasai warrior style. What I would have done, I have no idea, but I felt like at least I had my club.
You wanted to have a chance.
I wanted to have a chance, so that we could go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and then dive back into the car. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Anyway, I think the sleeping inside of the vehicle is cool.
I prefer it. Everybody has their own method. It's really important in any of this stuff, is I chose to use a Grenadier. You can use a bunch of different vehicles for the same trip. I chose to sleep inside. Some people like roof tents. Some people like campers. Some people like trailers. I don't like trailers in Africa because you've all seen the videos of elephants charging.
Yeah, there's just that big bull elephant in South Africa.
It just killed somebody.
Yeah.
So that's the reason why I don't use trailers in Africa, is because there's times you got to back up.
Yeah.
So.
And there's a cost to all of it per night.
That's right.
Roof tents they don't all require roof racks anymore, but most people do a roof rack and then do a roof tent.
That's right.
And if we're talking US dollars, well, you just spent probably $5,000 for a decent roof tent. And even a decent roof tent, after so many nights, they are a consumable item. They get left out in the sun. They're mounted on the top of the vehicle or whatever. So,
and they affect fuel economy.
Yeah.
They affect vehicle handling, which is the reason why I don't typically run them. And I'm so happy that I slept inside the Grenadier. I would say somewhere around 25 to 30% of the nights I slept inside the vehicle, and I loved it. It became my little home. The last night that I slept in it in Djibouti, it was an emotional thing to think this is the last night that I'm going to be sleeping in this car in Africa, and it was just awesome. It was just I came to love it. I used the Melville and Moon bed rolls, which are perfect for that. I had 2 of them back there. They have a little canvas cover. They have a liner on the inside. They have a fairly thin pad, so if you're really sensitive to that, you may want to make an adjustment. All I did was I took a Maasai blanket and I rolled it up or rolled it out, and I just kind of added some padding with that. But awesome product. So
So let's talk about the start of the trip.
Yeah, so we drove. Yeah, we drove from Joburg through the Cedarburg, stayed at this incredible place called Bachran's.
Oh yeah, with what's
Ozzy.
His name? Yeah, I met Ozzy. Yeah.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so great. Ozzy's amazing. He's from Turkey. Very charming.
Super nice guy.
Very charming guy.
Yeah, he took me out for drinks when I was in Cape Town.
That's fantastic. He's awesome, and he has this incredible eco lodge. And when I say eco lodge, I don't want people to think that this is like a 5-star.
People helicopter in.
They do helicopter in,
but it's its own thing.
It is very rustic. You got to walk to the shower and the bathroom as part of your thing. But it also is perfect. It's important to know that it's perfect. I loved it. It's incredibly beautiful. There are Cape leopard there, baboon. There's Aboriginal rock art. It's just incredible.
You gotta. It's actually a really good one to follow on Instagram. I think it's literally just at Backrans, BAKKRANS.
I believe so.
And then also, speaking of Cape leopards, follow the Cape Leopard Trust.
Yeah. So cool.
That's a really, really special thing.
Yeah, and it's a way to give back. It's a way to help maintain, like by staying there, you're helping to keep this place wild.
Yeah.
And it's all built from locally sourced materials. So 1,000 years from now, no one will even know that anybody was there other than the remains of a couple walls.
Yeah, the Cedarburg. And here's the really cool thing about the Cedarburg. I haven't been, but I want to go. You can fly into Cape Town direct now from the United States. I think that I flew from Newark, for example, overnight flight, really well timed. You can spend a couple days in Cape Town, which is a lovely city. It eschews kind of everything that you've heard about South Africa.
Yep.
Like we went to this one place for dinner, and I'm like, "Am I in Monaco?"
Yeah.
Like it was beautiful.
Cape Town's special.
You can do some wineries, and then you can rent a car, and within half a day's drive, you're in the Cedarburg.
That's right.
It's just meant to be like to me, I like kind of drier desert climates.
And it is, and it's a little bit higher elevation, so the weather was really nice. I mean, South Africa in general, it's just a huge study in contrasts. And if you're an adventurous person, which some days I ascribe myself to be, it's like, it's the place for me. Like if I was to live anywhere else in the world, it would be in Africa. And we'll talk about this later, but I would probably have to decide between Kenya and South Africa. But
South Africa has its challenges,
but so many advantages too, and it's very affordable. Nairobi is not affordable. Do yourself a favor
and do not look at property in South Africa as an American.
I know. It's like for less than you would spend on a Tacoma, you'd have your own, like on a wild game farm, your own cottage. Yeah.
And
Starlink works there now, and it's just like you'd be
great.
So set. You'd be so set. But yeah, South Africa is awesome. And then we came into Cape Town. I met up with James at Melville and Moon, awesome guy, and they put some seat covers. They're the official seat cover supplier for the Grenadier, and they're going to be available soon. Not to like give you the extra plug here, but So if you go through Adventure Imports, you're going to be able to get access to Melville and Moon seat covers for the Grenadier and a bunch of other vehicles. So
thanks for the plug. I try to stay away from that stuff.
Well, I mean, the seat covers were so good that I kind of want to plug.
It is. The seat covers are great. We're going to bring in the furniture. We're going to bring in all the bags. It's not going to be for everyone.
Yeah.
It's very, it's a near luxury brand in South Africa.
Yeah.
It's very cool. Like
but it's also affordable. I mean, I don't have it with me here, but I bought this rollable chessboard to have on the trip with all the little chess pieces, and it's like the size of a Hydro Flask water bottle.
Yeah.
And it's, in South Africa, it was around $35.
Yeah.
Maybe $40. I don't remember because I don't always do the conversion right, but it was almost free.
Yeah.
So that we got the seat covers installed, a spare tire cover, which I'm not a huge fan of spare tire covers, but this one I kind of liked with the way that there's this plastic cover that I already don't like on the Grenadier. So I think it actually works.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and the Melville spare tire cars are a little bougie. You see them on the nicest cars in the nicest areas, and it's kind of...
That's probably true. I mean, it is nice to just not have a completely dirty mess of a rear tire.
Yeah.
And you're also keeping it out of the sun too, which is kind of nice.
Yeah.
Kind of nice.
So from...
Oh, and then we also grabbed a Indiflate when we were in South Africa.
Oh, yeah. Well. You met up with Rickus, didn't you?
No, they were not able to do that. They tried very hard. The timing didn't work. So I actually went to, I believe it was a Mega World or something like that.
Yep.
And grabbed it there. Safari Center. Is that right? Safari
4x4 Mega World is probably it.
It was either that or a Safari Center. One of the others is where I went, grabbed the Indiflate and a couple other little pieces that we needed to finish stuff up. But even the fridge was a 25 liter. It's fine for the whole trip. I ran, Red Arc Solar to keep things running when I was in camp. It was all very simple.
Yeah. Yeah, and it can all be kind of flown in, so to speak. You can put most of that stuff in your luggage. So from Cape Town, you then started working your way
up
did
the
you do
East
garden
Cape.
route?
No, we did. Well, we did. I believe that is correct, but we focused on getting to Cape Agulhas first.
Okay.
So we wanted to get the true southernmost point of Africa, not for any reason other than Joe hadn't been there and it seemed like a fun thing. I'd been there before, but it's like a fun ceremonial place to start from. So went there and then continued up the East Cape all the way up into Mozambique.
I just couldn't believe how beautiful that was.
Yeah, stunning.
I spent some time in Port Elizabeth and north of Port Elizabeth in January, February. Went to another really cool camp called the Ford Outpost, actually with James from Melville, and they're a long-standing farming family in the area. Some of their farmlands have been converted into this Sibuya Game Reserve, and you can stay at this Ford Outpost. And it's kind of, rustic, really cool, really special. Like you feel like you're camping, but you have, there's a bathroom and
nice.
and some stuff.
There's a lot of
safari tents, really nice Melville furniture and everything. And they're just Ford Outpost on Instagram. That's a really cool one. But that whole area,
it's chock full of that.
It's like driving through the central coast of California.
It's incredible.
With no people.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And again,
great food.
Yeah.
You're staying in an Airbnb for $40 a night.
Yeah.
I can't even describe how somehow it's world class.
Yeah.
But it's also totally affordable.
Yeah.
So it's just, you got to invest some money to get there. But I've seen, I've taken flights back because I've flown back and forth to South Africa, I don't know, maybe 24 times now in my life. And I've flown as cheap as $1,200.
Yeah.
Round trip. So you can
find deals.
You can find deals on a flight.
And that's coming from Arizona.
That's
too.
right. Yeah, that's right. So,
I think, travel is generally expensive. Flights are generally expensive, but there are those places in the world where you can kind of claw some of that back.
Oh, big time.
Even just traveling in the United States has become very expensive.
Yeah. You're going to spend 3 times more on a Best Western here than you would spend on a lodge, like a nice, simple lodge in South Africa.
Yeah, like for example, Scott and I were together in Johannesburg, and I think it was end of January.
Yeah.
And it was like $240 to stay at the Four Seasons.
Yeah.
With this beautiful included breakfast that we've done when we've stayed there before.
It's incredible.
$240 these days.
It gets you a Hilton. It really does. If you're lucky.
It's and anywhere somewhat. This is the most desirable place in South Africa.
Yeah.
I know that I'm not trying to say that's not no money, but for what you're getting, that's not even the airport Hilton anymore.
Yeah.
It's really great value.
The U.S. dollar is really strong against the rand, so it's a great time to travel to South Africa and check out the stuff that Overland is doing too. And they're back in South Africa again. They're doing another trip, another cool loop. Check out their content as well. It's just super inspirational stuff, and there's plenty of technical driving to do, 4-wheel driving where you're in low range, you got the lockers on, and there's baboons, jumping on the roof of your car. It's just it's as cool as it gets. It's literally as cool as it gets. Yeah. So
and Namibia too. I know you didn't go to Namibia on this trip, but
no.
Man,
you could spend 10 lifetimes.
I could move to Windhoek.
Totally.
Like,
yeah, great city.
So let's move on, I guess, to Mozambique.
Yeah, so Mozambique is really about the beaches, and again, super affordable, and you can do everything from like a yoga retreat to, a surfing camp.
Yeah.
And everything in between.
Because it seems like a lot of South Africans vacation.
They do.
In Mozambique.
They
and
do.
I have to say, of the entirety of your trip, where I was getting the
FOMO,
sitting on the beach, and yeah, that was Mozambique for me. That's where I was definitely like jealous, because it just looked fantastic.
It's really great, and the people are great, and they're used to tourists, but there's still a lot of wild places, so you can drive through the coastal sand dunes. So big challenges, big dunes, and then you're camping on the Indian Ocean with not another soul around. Like there was a local fisherman that came by at one point, but it was just incredible, and a challenge, a vehicle challenge, and a navigation challenge. I mean, we used Garmin navigation because of Tracks for Africa. Tracks for Africa is available as an app, but you only really use that for planning or as an extreme backup because it's not very good.
It's like a glorified PDF app.
Yeah.
It's good, but
it's
you're
okay.
not
It's okay.
navigating.
There's some fairly good information in there, but what you really want is a Garmin, and you want their detailed Tracks for Africa maps preloaded, or get the micro SD card and load it onto the device itself. You can also buy it online and then upload it into the device. But then you get incredible detail. So like even in Mozambique, which the thing to know is a lot of these countries have had intense conflicts. So you cannot just assume that you can go anywhere or that it's safe to go anywhere in Africa, because most of these conflicts are recent enough that it includes mining of areas. So we were driving along, and it was like right on the Tracks for Africa map. It doesn't show this on Google Maps, but it sure shows it on Tracks for Africa of like, caution, mined area. Like, don't leave the track. Like, stay in the track that you're in. Like, don't go off like to go take a wee,
you may not have a wee.
Yeah, you may not have a wee anymore. Yeah, exactly. So, but it says it right on the Tracks for Africa map of like mines, in this caution, minefield. So it's just really, Tracks for Africa is incredibly valuable, and it's always updated. There's a lot of user supplied track data, so the tracks are always fairly accurate, and they're usually still open. So like they do a good job of removing stuff when they need to, or adding stuff when new tracks are available. So with a larger screen, you really have good detail, and you can, like in the case of Mozambique, we chose to take very obscure coastal tracks, all four-wheel drive, all low range, all deep sand. We drove for days that way.
Wow. It's the dream.
It was a dream. Yeah, it was awesome. And it was awesome to do it with Joe, and Joe's a great photographer and great friend. So it was cool just to hang out and do that stuff together. And then he took off because he had some other trips he had to do out of Tofu, and I just continued on my own through northern Mozambique and into Malawi. I did all of Malawi by myself, and then drove, through Tanzania to Dar es Salaam, and that was interesting. I mean, it was a good, when you travel solo, you learn a lot about yourself, and it gives you time to reflect. I listened to about 800 podcasts. Paula laughs at me because of she's like, what were you listening to? On the whatever the podcast was on, some medical topic. I listened to a lot of Peter Attia, and it's like some obscure ApoB lipoprotein that I was listening to. But I find that stuff fascinating, and it keeps my mind engaged while I'm driving.
I'm on more podcasts than I have ever listened to in my life.
Well, everybody has their different thing. So I like it just to churn through audiobooks, and another audiobook that I listened to on that trip is called The Comfort Crisis, which I'd recommend people listen to. That was my second time listening to that. That's another great book. But it was just nice to have that time, but also it makes me realize that I'm really not a great solo traveler. I don't love it. I did it because it needed to be done, and I learned some things about myself, and I was able to have that kind of quiet, reflective time that I probably did need. But it isn't my preference. Some people like to do that. Like I give Dan Greck a lot of credit. Like he's done a lot of miles by himself.
Yeah.
So he's much better company to himself than I am, clearly. But, I prefer to have people that I love with me doing things that I love. So that's my preference. But I learned that.
I always think that I want to travel solo, and then I'm like a night away from Laura, and I'm like, well, this sucks.
Yeah, because she's such a great travel companion.
Yeah.
And you guys just travel. You guys travel so well together.
Yeah, we know how to bicker.
Yeah, I've never seen you guys actually bicker though. I mean, maybe the slightest. Usually, it's some hilarious little jab that she has thrown your direction, but
she holds me to task on things,
which is good,
which is really good for
really
me.
Good.
No, I think the key to where I'm going with that is the key to us traveling so well together is that if something is on one of our minds, if we're not having fun or we think something is just overrated or whatever, like we're very vocal about it to each other. We have no problem with communicating.
That's key.
Yeah, because I think a lot of the issues with, speaking to other couples that travel together, a lot of the issues come down to like, the one partner not trying to let the other partner down and
Sure.
they're really unhappy. You have to just be like, I don't like this.
Yeah.
Okay, then you make a change.
Right.
It's like that's why you have an overland vehicle is if this road really sucks, well, drive to another road. Or
and some all of us have
change
good,
your area.
All of us have good instincts, and Laura has particularly good instincts. I mean, you've shared the story in Australia of like she's like we shouldn't go down this road, and you did anyways. And it like for me
and my Earth Roamer thing.
Yeah, and for me traveling with Tavia, it was just because she is so open for adventure and really resilient. It was more like I needed to just be checking in, like, how are you doing? And it, like 100% of the time she was fine. But to your point, it's good to check in on your companion. So
yeah, you just communicate, right? I mean, I think I'm not trying to offer relationship advice, but generally, if you communicate more, it is better than communicating less.
That's true.
And I think
that's so true.
That's probably solid advice.
So it was interesting being done with that. I was glad to be done with that solo section.
Yeah, so your solo section was
northern Mozambique, all of Malawi, and then basically I crossed Tanzania the first time.
And you went to Dar es Salaam.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about Malawi.
Malawi is it is really beautiful, and the people are incredibly beautiful. It's one of the poorest countries in the world. And there are challenges that come along with that, but not challenges that would necessarily ever affect you as a traveler because the people are so beautiful and open and kind. And there's just very low instances of any kind of violent crime. There's some petty theft that can happen, but just really genuine, sweet people. Lots of really happy, joyous children playing in the lake.
You talk about that a lot.
Yeah.
And the only thing that comes to my mind is I'm like, okay, like, not having money and there's some unfortunate things, but happiness is happiness.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of really miserable tablet kids in America.
I agree. And you don't see any miserable kids in Malawi.
Yeah.
I didn't see any miserable kids. I saw a lot of them jumping and playing and making improvised soccer balls or whatever version of play that they had time to play, and the adults had time to play with the kids too. They took work very seriously, but when they had gotten enough food for the day or a fish or whatever, they were done. And then they were all hanging out and playing because nobody had a smartphone. So, or very few did.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting to see that. I found the country to be awesome. So yeah, I really liked it. I think it's too little visited. One of the roads that I took from the border down to the lake, it was all paved, and I was like, I want to be on a GS right now, or on a Ducati Desert X or something like that. I want to be on an adventure bike on this road because it was awesome. Like it was one of the coolest, twisty, turny. Like you couldn't hang it out there because every corner had a little surprise, but it would be really fun on a motorcycle.
Yeah. Interesting. And then, I guess
I was ringing the little Grenadier's neck. That was one thing that I noticed. To continue on the topic of things that I noticed about the car, the engine is fairly small displacement at 3 liters, and it is an incredibly efficient engine. So it's very smooth running, very efficient engine, in the sense that there's very low friction within the motor. So when you're in a low gear and you're trying to rely on compression braking, which compression braking will be at its best in a gas motor, unless you have an exhaust brake in a diesel. But I was surprised by that. The compression braking was not as good as I would have wanted it to be. It really ran through the RPM, so you could actually get up close to red line just trying to hold the vehicle back.
Interesting.
Because the Grenadier is heavy. It's a heavy car, over 5,000 pounds. So that's a lot of weight. So when you're going down these steep declines, you either have to go very slow so that there's not enough inertia happening, momentum happening, so it can hold it back, or you need to use the brakes a lot. So I was glad that the vehicle actually has really good brakes. I never got the brakes hot, but I used a combination of compression braking and a lot of braking because the engine didn't have enough compression braking. Yeah. I also wanted to take a brief moment to thank all of you for listening to the Overland Journal podcast. By listening to this podcast and subscribing to the Overland Journal magazine, you're supporting our employee-owned and veteran-owned business. Impartial reviews and in-depth content like this would not be possible without your support. If you enjoy the podcast, I think you'd really love the print magazine as well. And 100% of that subscription price goes back into creating the content like you're listening to right now. And as a special thank you for your loyalty, we're giving 20% off any subscription. And that even includes our special lifetime subscription, which includes numerous lifetime-only benefits. You can go to overlandjournal.com and use the code OverlandPodcast at checkout. Again, that's code OverlandPodcast at checkout, and that'll give you 20% off. I sincerely appreciate your support. It's a 3-liter BMW engine, so it's just designed to have so little friction, and it's probably the way that it manages compression braking through the combustion cycle, but it just doesn't have a lot of compression braking. It's not that it doesn't have any. I would say it's just 30% less than what I would prefer. It's not regen
braking on an EV.
No, it's like 30% less than what I would want it to be.
Okay. It's a pretty small little niggle.
Yeah, but I mean, the car is so good. I got to say something. It's I got to be really open about anything that I experienced in the vehicle. The other thing that people talk a lot about is the dead pedal on the right-hand drive.
And some people are like cutting them out.
I can see why. I can be sympathetic to why that would be a concern for some people, but I actually it never bothered me, and I'm 6'1". Like, it literally never bothered me. But what I realized was, a lot of times I kind of just take my left foot and I kind of curve it back towards the seat. So a lot of times I wasn't even using the dead pedal. So that might have been why I was less observant of it. But then I would be intentional about I'm going to use the dead pedal today and get some feedback. And I never really felt like it was that bad.
And is that turbo or transmission or
exhaust?
Exhaust. Okay.
Yeah, the exhaust it runs right through that recess. Which is why the dead pedal is taller on a right-hand drive than it is on a left-hand drive. So the complaints don't exist typically from the left-hand drive models.
Interesting. Well, that's fascinating. So let's talk about Tanzania, I guess. So you took a little break. You flew back home after, kind of really just, I guess, transiting from Malawi to Dar, from what I gather.
Yes, that's right.
So Tavia comes back with you.
Yeah. So
you guys
went
flew
into Zanzibar.
Oh, yeah, because you guys
Well, we actually flew into
Africa.
South Africa first. We spent a couple days there kind of overcoming the jet lag and going out to dinner with, Stanley and folks from Front Runner and good friends that I have in South Africa. And then we flew to Zanzibar.
Zanzibar is cool.
Oh, yeah.
I think flying into Zanzibar, well, actually, I'll say this, flying out in the little bush planes out of Zanzibar, the ocean is so beautiful.
Gorgeous.
And Zanzibar culturally is a little different. Like, it's kind of its own, I don't want to call it a nation state, but it's an autonomous region.
And it is very unique culturally.
Tanzania.
It would have been occupied heavily by Arabs throughout history. the place that we stayed, right across the little bay, was the Sultan of Oman's palace, the remains of it.
Oh,
the
old
walls.
Hyatt?
No.
Because that was also a palace from some Omani
Nice.
dude.
No, I didn't. The place that we stayed wasn't the palace. The old palace was actually, parts of the old palace were in the little compound that we stayed.
So were
at.
you in Stone Town?
No, we were north on the coast quite a bit to kind of get out of the city.
Yeah, because I didn't really. We walked around Stone Town and hung out and had dinner and had some drinks. Like it was cool, but I think their biggest tourist attraction is the Freddie Mercury Museum.
Yeah, but it's also really important if you're there and you have some time is to go to where the slave trading occurred. I think it's really important for people to experience that, and with a great degree of humility around like the human suffering that happened in places like that. So that is a part of the history of that place was slave trading, and it's just good to be reminded that not that long ago in human history, those kinds of things were happening, and there a lot of suffering from that.
Yeah, that's I guess the reality of human history.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. But it's also got a lot of other history there, and a very a heavier Arab influence. It's more of a Muslim culture there religiously, and the people are incredible. It's just a very vibrant place. Yeah. So we stayed in this nice little. I mean, we stayed in a resort, and it was less than $200 a night, or maybe it was $211 a night, or something like that.
Yeah, I think we spent like $180.
Yeah,
like the Park Hyatt.
Yeah, it was very affordable.
It was our honeymoon. I mean,
yeah, of course.
I didn't feel bad spending that.
You shouldn't. Yeah, you shouldn't. And then we decided to, instead of flying from Zanzibar to Dar es Salaam, because the Dar es Salaam airport is it's at a weird spot.
Yeah,
it's difficult to get there.
The domestic and the international terminal, and it's like a 15-minute walk.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. So we had to pick up the car in Dar es Salaam. So we decided to take the ferry.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
Cool.
It was awesome. So the process of getting the taxi to where you get the tickets from the ferry, that was all fine. We found our way into the ticket thing, that was all fine. But then it's like a gauntlet. Once you've got your ticket, you got to walk the streets with all your luggage, and there's all these people trying to take your money, not steal your money, take your money by let me carry your bag, or let me show you the way, or all these air quote fixers. And I could see the place I needed to go to. Yeah. So that was that. And Tavia is trying to basically hold on to my belt because she's small. She's tiny. So she's trying not to get lost in the crowd, and I'm trying to make my way through the crowd. So it was right out of an Indiana Jones movie. It was extremely. I loved it, and I look back and she was. She was in it. She was making it happen, but you could tell this is a whole new experience.
Yeah.
So it was really fun though. And then the ferry was beautiful. That ferry was super nice.
Well, it's just a beautiful part of the world.
Yeah. The water was beautiful. And then you get into Dar es Salaam in the port on the other end, and then you're back into the chaos and the insanity of all that. And then we found an Uber, and next thing you know, 10 minutes later, I'm at the Grenadier dealership, and there's the car. So back reunited, and it felt so good.
So then from there, you kind of worked your way to Serengeti. I think you guys went through Arusha and
We started by going up the coast because I was really interested in that whole region. There's some new national parks along the coast. It's one of the few places in the world where you can see elephants going to the ocean. So that was really fun, and it had been very wet, a lot of raining. So the national parks were challenging, the roads were challenging. You got your low range diff lock, don't get stuck with all the lions and stuff like that. So there was one point when Tavia was driving, and I could tell the way that the road was leaning and where the mud puddle was and everything, that we were going to slide into this mud puddle. And I just said, go. And she immediately did that. She went to the floor with the throttle, and the car just launched through this mud hole, and it was deep. I mean, I could feel the car going in, and we would have been stuck for sure if she had hesitated even. And then the next thing you know, the rear end's coming around. So now she's counter steering, and then it's spinning the other way. So we did about 100 meters going all versions of Sideways, and came out the other end just fine, and a lot of giggling and laughing because it was such a crazy moment.
And one very muddy Grenadier.
That's right. It was a very muddy Grenadier, but the whole thing that was going through her head was like, don't get stuck, because like then you're winching in lion and hyena territory. So
sometimes frowned upon.
Yes, exactly. Well, I mean, it all would have been a good story, I'm sure, but yeah, so that was really neat. And then able to go into some of these smaller little towns and villages that again had that heavy Arab influence, but also some influence from the Germans and also some influence from the British, and it was a lot going on there that was really cool. So it was you could get old coins from all the different people that were in charge for whatever 100 years that they stayed in charge for.
That's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, it was totally fascinating. And then we made our way up to Kilimanjaro, which was one of my goals, was to actually drive around the northern side of Kilimanjaro.
Very cool.
Yeah.
How did you like that?
It was nice because it's very little traveled, so there's just not a lot of.
Most people kind of come in from the south. They fly into, I think it's either Arusha or Kilimanjaro Airport. They have their own now.
That's right. Yeah. So they're really tourists tend to be focused on. Well, they're either climbing Kilimanjaro, so they're not really doing an overland thing, or their goal is to make it to Arusha or to Serengeti or to Ngorongoro, some version of that. But Kilimanjaro is massive, and driving around it took days because it's so big.
It's huge.
We had about a 15-minute window when we could see the summit, and I got some photos, so that was awesome. We were pretty lucky with that. And then we did a really cool overland route on the north side of Arusha, just looking again at Tracks for Africa, like, that's interesting. And we were the only vehicle that we saw the entire time was ours. There was motorcycles every once in a while, donkeys, people walking, but we were the only vehicle that we saw the entire route. Wow. And it was, low range, really interesting, challenging terrain, washouts and all kinds of stuff. And it was actually the one point where we had the only damage that we did to the vehicle the whole time was we were doing this really steep, silted climb, and there was just a rock hidden in the silt, and it hit the steering damper, and the steering damper hangs a little bit low on the front axle, and it has a metal cover that goes over the shaft to keep the shaft from getting damaged or from causing leaking within the unit. And it's interesting because it actually nothing failed, other than there's a couple little tack welds that hold that cover in place and oriented and kind of aligned properly with the body of the shock, and it broke those little welds. It didn't fall off, it didn't slide off or anything like that. It just was now loose, and it would hit the body of the shock. It sounded like a bell. It sounded like you ever heard a cow going down?
Oh yeah.
Ding, 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 ding. That's what it sounded like.
Okay.
So it was in 20,000 kilometers. That was the one thing that we damaged on the car. It doesn't even have a door ding in it. So
yeah, I mean, that's interesting. Sometimes you see, particularly with the steering stabilizers, a lot of them have switched like a plastic cover, like Old Man Emu, for example. And
I think that's a better choice.
I actually thought it was kind of cheesy. But now I realize, maybe that's actually because it would have just either broken off or, went back to shape.
Yeah, and again, that's the only time we hit it the whole route. But there's some aftermarket now. There's some Fox shock options that actually sit it up a little higher, and then it has a rubber boot over the shaft. So there's other options that you can go with. Or you can even order a Bilstein one if you like to stay with Bilstein that just doesn't have the cover on it.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's other options.
So then you worked your way towards Serengeti, which is just
it was incredible.
Well,
actually we hit Ngorongoro first.
Oh yeah, Ngorongoro's on my list. So tell me about that.
Yeah, so we stayed at a little tented camp just outside of the park. We actually stayed there for a couple days because we just kind of wanted to relax a little bit more because we've been doing a lot of driving, driving hard to get to the next place,
Sometimes that's really important. It's all too easy to just go. And sometimes you need to just kind of soak a place in.
Yep. And sometimes I need to get work done too. So I do a little bit of work every day that allows me to stay up most of the time with emails and general communications. But then there's other times I just need some deep work. So I need a couple hours to get a project done or some writing or something. So I was able to do that, and I do that, once or twice a week. I try to have an extra night at some place.
Yeah.
And that was a really cool spot. And then the next day we drove right into Ngorongoro. And this is the one thing we talk about Africa being very affordable. The one time that it becomes very expensive is when you're doing self-drive in the national parks in Tanzania and in Kenya. So it was about $1,400, and we only spent 24 hours in the park.
Huh.
So you have...
You, sir, got a bad deal.
Well...
I'm joking, but...
I'd spend it again, but
yeah.
it is a lot of money.
Interesting.
It's a lot of money because I was driving a foreign registered vehicle. Tavia and I were both foreigners. So we had around $200 each for the entry park entry fees for us as individuals. Like that's what you would pay when you were traveling.
I had again.
Yeah, it was all part of the deal. It was all part of the deal. But then you have to spend $260 a day to bring the vehicle into the park. Mm. But then we chose to do the Ngorongoro crater, which is separate. So that was another $160 a person plus another $200 and something for the vehicle. Yeah. And it all added up to about $1,400. For 24 hours.
You do see the conservation efforts.
Totally. And again, I would pay it again. It's just that's the one point where you're like, it's no longer cheap.
Yeah, we've talked, I guess,
it's
a
no
lot
longer
about
cheap.
value of Africa.
And I'm not saying that even the value doesn't line up because it was one of the most incredible wildlife experiences I've ever had. And to be able to do it in my own vehicle was awesome.
That's really special.
It was super special. But you just you don't want to be surprised. You don't want to be surprised. And they'll happily take your Amex. Like it's just,
yeah.
You can put it on your credit card, but like just be aware that it's going to be expensive when you use your own vehicle.
Yeah. So you enjoyed the self-drive thing?
I did. I prefer it. There are a lot of reasons not to do self-drive. I think that I've done enough game drives now with guides that now I do enjoy the process of doing it myself. But I think if it's your trip of a lifetime to Africa, don't even try it.
Yeah.
Go with somebody who can spot 10 times more game than you can.
It's not there's the spotting of it, but then there's the speaking of the local language, I believe,
all of
Swahili.
Yeah, that's right.
If you've ever been on game drives, the radio chatter and what they're really talking about is where they're seeing stuff. They all work together, and they're just lovely.
So lovely, yeah.
Yeah, really, really lovely people. Make sure to tip them
generously.
Yeah. We were able to just see so much stuff. Like we spent six days back to back doing game drives. But we got to the Mara River, and it's like, because he heard, he told us, hey, there's a potential for crossing. The guides think that they're gonna, the wildebeest are gonna go. And it's like we pull up, and you have beverages and things, and you crack a beer, and then boom, they move. And people wait weeks sometimes to see that kind of stuff. Like that's maybe where you're gonna, with the self-drive, if this is that trip of a lifetime,
Yeah, I just learned to watch where the other game vehicles are driving.
Yeah.
And then if they're all congregated,
there's a reason.
I just drive over there.
What you looking at?
Yeah, exactly. I drive over there, and I try to be cool and like not get in their way or wait my turn or whatever. But then there's there's a pride of lions or whatever. Yeah, and it was just incredible. And I just remember Tavia spotted the only rhino that we saw on the trip, and
rhino. You saw that in Serengeti.
In Ngorongoro. Yeah.
Oh, in Ngorongoro. Okay.
And then she just really wanted to see an elephant, which I get. Like in hindsight, you think about the big five and you think about lions and all that other stuff, and those are all awesome. Never to take anything away from it. But in my experience, there's nothing like an elephant. Mm-hmm. There's just absolutely nothing like an elephant. So, and I understood. I get it. I know why you really want to see one. So when we finally got to hang out with elephants right down there, and then eventually during some of the other self-drive, we were all alone in parts of the Serengeti, just down this dirt track.
See, that's where it would be special.
Here's an entire group of elephant that are just all like babies running around with twigs and, trumpeting. And we just got to sit there for 20 minutes and watch this all unfold. So, yeah, it was incredible.
Elephants can also be kind of assholes.
You got to be careful.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of it depends on how they've been treated, because elephants have an incredible memory. So if they live in an area where there's not been a lot of poaching and there's not been a lot of negative human interaction for a long time, they tend to be pretty chill, unless they're drunk on amarula fruit, which that can happen too. And then, but like I remember being in Kidepo in northern Uganda, where they were not treated well for a long time, and they were incredibly aggressive. They'd see the vehicle coming and they would start. As soon as they saw you, they'd start charging.
Interesting. Yeah.
And that was where I learned to back up really quick, because they were coming after you.
Well, wildlife conservation is super important.
Yeah.
It's something that I really, really care about. I would say check out the Tusk Foundation.
That's an important one, yeah.
They do a lot. They're very well run. I spent a couple days in Namibia with the founder of that, and just lovely people. A lot of really good people behind them. So if you've got a little extra coin in your pocket, I do think that there's actually a tangible result happening from these wildlife charities. They really care, and there's a lot of smart people that
really care. Yeah.
That come from finance backgrounds, business leaders, whatever, and this is what they dedicate themselves to. And nobody's trying to get rich off of it. They're generally just trying to help.
And all the way up to the governments. The governments really care about their national parks. I've never experienced any version of a request for a bribe, any kind of corruption. I've never experienced that at any of the national parks in Tanzania and in Kenya.
Yeah. When we were in Tanzania, it was during COVID, and there's only a couple people in the lodge. We're sitting on like the balcony of this hotel, and we see this huge procession of vehicles, motorcade, and they get a little closer, and there's a little flag on it. We ended up spending several days at this lodge with the president of Tanzania.
Oh, nice.
Which was fascinating. But she, I believe she was the first female president of Tanzania, was filming a documentary about the Serengeti and its importance and conservation. But for somebody I think it's important for all politicians to see, their country's natural beauty.
That's right. Roosevelt was a great example of that.
Yeah. I would encourage, people in Washington to, before they want to strip mine and, drill on
whatever version of pilfering.
Yeah. Whatever it is. It was really cool to actually see them care.
No, those are the great stories about Roosevelt, is that the conservationists would actually bring extra animals, so that he would be so overwhelmed that he would sign off on these big chunks of land. So they found a way.
Yeah.
So, but it made a big difference. Yeah, so Tanzania is great, and it was also starting to flood there, so that was exciting. We had some bridges that were either flooded over or washed out, so we had to be really creative around our route, and take a few risks at some water crossings that I felt comfortable with.
There's a lot of crocodile there too.
Yeah, that's right. So you really got to be on your game. Yeah, exactly. And then we went to Lake Victoria, and this was cool because we just found it. I think it was just on Airbnb, and just found this little lodge where it's built over these wetlands, and you got to walk on these elevated platforms, and the little huts are elevated, and throughout the night you hear the hippo, their feet, coming through the mud, and it was just awesome. It was just incredible. So
don't mess with hippo.
No, they'll kill you.
Hungry hippo.
Yeah, they'll kill you quicker than anything else there, for sure.
And then you were in Kenya.
Yeah, and then we drove into Kenya, and the one thing that was really neat that happened there is we connected with this fellow Grenadier owner, Abid, And Abid was actually the first one to take delivery of a Grenadier in Africa.
Cool.
And we went and we drove up to this place called Lake Ellis, which is over 11,000 feet on Mount Kenya. And, it was challenging. I mean, there was one route we were taking. We had to turn around because it was too many trees down, and we had to come back around the other way. It was awesome. Like low range, rear diff locked, like challenging, awesome four-wheeling. And then you camp on the shore of this 11,000 foot high mountain lake with the peak of Mount Kenya. It's just, it's like the stuff of dreams. It really is. And it's so accessible, and there's just nobody there. Like the whole time we were there, we ran into one vehicle, a Hilux, and this guy was bringing up a European tourist that wanted to do some day hikes, and that was it. That was the only person that we encountered the whole time driving around on Mount Kenya, which is just like one of the coolest overland routes I've ever done, and there was one other vehicle the whole time.
Africa's special.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. And it just keeps, this whole Eastern, it was why I decided to do the Eastern route as opposed to the West Coast, because I wanted to experience all of these things. It's not to take anything away from the West Coast, but that wasn't my objective. Yeah. My objective was to go from Southern Africa to Northern Africa, cross the equator and, cross the continent, but also to see the things that I wanted to see, which was Eastern Africa. Mm. So it was just so special. And Nairobi's incredible. It's definitely like the tech hub, the tech heartbeat of Africa is happening there. Jay Shapiro, who's a longtime member of Expedition Portal, a good friend, he's running these little tech incubation centers out of Nairobi. His podcast was on a couple months ago. You can listen to that, Jay Shapiro.
Super cool guy.
Incredible guy. There's just a lot of incredible people. And that was where I met Jonathan Jensen, who you guys have heard on the podcast. He works for the State Department, and awesome guy.
Yeah.
And we had him on the podcast, so listen to that. In fact, we're going to have him on again here soon, talking about some more stuff. But he was just extremely helpful when we ran into challenges later on in the trip. So
yeah. And then I guess it's Ethiopia and Djibouti.
Yeah, and the last time I was in Nairobi, the main focus was how do I get the vehicle into Ethiopia. So it took me weeks. It took me 4 months overall, 2 months of like really serious work, and then 3 weeks of like getting paperwork, going back and forth to the Ethiopian embassy in Nairobi. So it was just a lot of logistics, and it cost over $1,000 to get all the permitting. And then all of a sudden one day I had it. I had the documentation that I needed, and everything was approved. And then Brian Bass flew in. I did one last little journey with Abid and Jonathan, where we went up to Lake Turkana. That was a really interesting trip, and it was the closest that I have ever been to banditry that I was aware of. So when we were driving up to Lake Turkana, which banditry happens in this area when there's a lot of cattle rustling. It's kind of Wild West stuff. It's Wild West kind of banditry. It would be like in the Old West when they rob a stagecoach. It's like they don't really kill the people. They just take your money and then you keep going on your stagecoach route or whatever.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of thing that's happening there. It's very Wild West. And Abid's phone just like starts blowing up the one time he gets signal, and the people that we had stayed with the night before were like, there's bandits in the area, there's been multiple attacks, we just want you. And we went through this region 15 minutes after someone was robbed.
Wow.
It was that close. So again, in those situations, it's important to keep your wits about you. These kinds of interactions, they are looking for financial resources. They're not looking to kill you, but they will. They're not looking to take your car, especially like if you're driving a Grenadier. What are they going to do with that? Nothing.
Yeah.
So they want.
It's just like throwing smoke signals up to come get me.
Yeah. They. What are they going to do with that car? Nothing. They can't sell it. They can't part it out. There's one of one in the country.
Yeah.
In this case, there's only a couple of them in the country. So if those things happen, give them what they ask for. Don't resist. And then, chalk it up as an experience and get on your way. The thing that people get into a lot of trouble with And there was a UK service member who 2 weeks prior had been killed because he fought back during one of these roadside robberies. So this is not at all to make anyone think that Kenya is dangerous. There are areas of Kenya that are well known as being dangerous, and we happen to be in one of those.
Yeah.
So the rest of Kenya, it's not an issue. This one particular region around Lake Turkana does have some challenges. So it was really interesting to, like, we get to the next, checkpoint, and it's like, yeah, we were that close. Wow. So really interesting.
Heck.
and then it's par for the course. Yeah. So, and then I got to pick up Brian Bass in Samburu, which was awesome. And I love traveling with the guy, and he was going to be the perfect fit for trying to figure all this stuff out with Ethiopia and Djibouti, and just his experience as an archaeologist, as an anthropologist. He's a great driver. It's just someone that I trust. So I got to pick him up at the airport, and next thing you know, we're bombing our way up into Ethiopia, and sure enough, it worked. It took a couple days, but then we were across the border, and Ethiopia was incredible. And we go into real detail on that in this other podcast, but Ethiopia was truly incredible. Huge diversity of culture. They were never fully conquered by a foreign power, so it retains a lot of that, original African culture, where it's not been influenced heavily by a conquering nation. So, there were areas of Ethiopia that were conquered, but
the Italians
on the coast,
tried to mess around
on the coast, yeah. But it was also the first time that an African army beat a Western army. Was in Ethiopia. Yeah. That's pretty cool. So that empowered a lot of nations to be like, oh wait, maybe we can fight back. So there's a lot of history there. That's a lot of early human history there. So there's just a lot to see. And
very, very early human civilization thrived in Ethiopia. Right.
Yeah, and you can see why. And there's just so much diversity, and just had an incredible time. And then. Again, because these are covered in a lot of detail in these other podcasts, but Ethiopia was a highlight of the trip for me. And then we got into Djibouti, which that's going to be on a future podcast, or actually, by the time you listen to this one, you'll already have heard it. But Djibouti was incredible. It was days and days and days detained at the border. And I don't regret a moment of it. It was all awesome. It was an incredible experience.
Me, what was going on? I'm like, are you okay? He's like, yeah, I'm great. What? Yeah. There's a dead goat next to me.
That's the truth. Yeah. And then the live goats were all chewing on cardboard. It was just like a totally surreal.
After day 3, I'd be chewing on cardboard.
Yeah, we were close. We were close to chewing on cardboard because we were starting to run out of supplies. We never ran out of water, but we were starting to run low on food. So, yeah, pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well,
it was awesome.
That'll be a fun one. That's probably one I'll actually listen to. I'll break my podcast rule.
I know I don't listen to us talk either because I was here.
It would be so uncomfortable to listen to us talk.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. But, overall, the trip, it was a 20-year goal to cross all 7 continents. And it's interesting, when I got to the other end of it, I do feel a lot of gratitude is what I feel. I don't feel like this overwhelming sense of accomplishment because there's nothing special about me. Anyone can do these things if they put their mind to it and they invest the 20 years to make it happen, or can be done in less time. But there's nothing unique about me. There was nothing unique about any of the vehicles. It can be done by others, and it will be done by others. What I think started off as an effort to do something to be the first to have done it is certainly something that was more egocentric. Yeah. Whereas when I finished the trip, it wasn't so much the accomplishment. It was the experiences. It was the people that I met along the way. It was the things I learned about myself that ended up being the greatest reward. So it wasn't that I accomplished this fancy thing, which is kind of silly in hindsight, but it's more that I was able to see so much of the world. And to do it with people that I really cared about, from the trips that I did with Greg Miller and Kurt Williams and Clay Croft and Brian and you and all these other people that I was able to, Tavia, and traveling around the world. Yeah. That was the stuff that I took away from. And I was also, at the end of it, I was just genuinely impressed by the vehicle. I mean, Brian and I, we drove up to the Gulf of Aden, right there at the entry to the Red Sea, the Indian Ocean. We'd crossed the continent of Africa, 20,000 kilometers. And there wasn't a single mechanical failure of the vehicle. We didn't have to bring in anyone from INEOS to fix anything. Yeah. We never had any warranty work done on the vehicle. There wasn't a single light on the dash. And it had completed what was a very arduous trip without any issues. So that, to me, that was what I wanted to know. I wanted to know, I mean, they say that the Grenadier is built for Africa. I wanted to prove that that was actually the case. And in hindsight, it was. It is the case. It's built for that continent. It's built for North America. It'll do it.
It looks like a pretty special car.
Yeah.
It's cool to see them running around.
And I kind of fell in love with it. Like at first, I was trying to make sure that I was trying to minimize my personal bias.
Yeah.
So because I was so excited that a new car company was coming out making cars just for us, that it's easy to have a lot of bias. So I tried to be as reserved as I could. But by the end of it, I was like, yeah, I really love this car. So, I'd really fallen in love with it because it had done everything that I wanted.
It's a very Scotty car.
It is a very Scotty car.
Like, it's a Defender that works.
Yeah, exactly. That's so true. Yeah, and all of the little modifications we did, they all worked perfect.
And they're like such minimal modification. Yeah. I mean, from what I understand, that car drove across Africa on its factory tires.
It did.
Like
the same car.
You can get BFG
everywhere,
all-terrains on it. I think that there's maybe an argument. Yeah, like the Grenadier is expensive, but when you look at like the true cost of buying something for one of these adventures, add it all up, like it's not
that expensive. It's not that expensive, and it doesn't need anything to go do it.
Yeah.
The things that I added was because I needed extra fuel. I needed a place to mount some max tracks. I needed a place to sleep, and that was it.
Yeah.
Like an afternoon, like we talked about, of work. So it was pretty simple. It had a winch from the factory.
Yeah.
So
it's like, I know that we've kind of talked about this before, but the availability of these like factory overland vehicles is
so good.
So cool.
So good.
And I think, from my end, just know that you don't actually have to mess with them.
That's right.
Like, and in a podcast that should be out soon, we talk about this where, I remember lifting my first Land Rover and, oh my God, it has 32-inch tires.
Yeah.
You just don't, it's so easy to get caught in the trap of more.
Right.
Jeep comes out with something that has 33s now, and then it's got to have 35s. They come out with something that has 35s. Oh, it's got to have 37s. AEV puts 37s on it, then people start asking 40s.
Yeah.
You don't need it.
Yeah. But if you want it, you can get it.
Sure.
If you want it, you can get it.
Yeah. Need versus want.
It's available. Yeah. So Africa was an incredible continent, and we've got the YouTube series has started. We've got 2 episodes out. There'll be a 3rd one out by the time everyone hears this. We were able to accomplish the goal of being the first in history to take a vehicle across all 7 continents. So it's kind of fun.
Cool. It's a big accomplishment.
I'm grateful to have been able to see all the things along the way.
Yeah, man.
So awesome. Yeah, and there's really nothing else that comes to mind around the vehicle, but there were some pieces of kit that I really enjoyed along the way. I think that having a smaller fridge is something people should consider. I only use a 25-liter fridge, and it was enough.
Did you have that 25 Dometic?
Yeah, it's a Dometic 25-liter, and it was just fine. I
actually have one of those now, too, and it's still surprising how much you can fit in it.
That's right.
It runs more at capacity, which means it then runs more efficiently.
And it's a lot smaller. It's a lot smaller. When I just ship the vehicle, it fits between the back seat and the front seat. It just drops right into the little footwell there. Perfect. And so it's not visible when you're looking into the back of the car. So I really, that kind of impressed me because I'd always run bigger fridges. The Tracks for Africa, I think, is another thing that I had a takeaway on that was really good. The Garmin watch. I had a Garmin Phoenix watch, Sapphire, and it was actually a really great accompaniment.
Oh, because that one had the little flashlight in it.
The flashlight, I'm like, that's the goofiest thing I've ever seen. But then I used it every single day.
Yeah, it's like you kind of use your phone.
That's right. And the flashlight is right there on your wrist. It can be in the middle of the night going to go pee. You're looking for, rain spiders on the floor or whatever. And you don't see the flashlight. It's not like it's some appendage on the watch. It's just a little band of LEDs. So I really liked, the watch was great for the trip, and it allowed me to track my sleep. So I find that to be really important for me when I travel, is to stay on top of good sleep, because then I drive better, I'm safer, I'm more mentally alert, I'm able to better handle stresses along the way when I get good sleep. So I really kind of made that a priority. I did like the Melville and Moon seat covers. They held up really well on the trip. So that was something that I thought was pretty cool. The sleeping system was really great overall, just being able to sleep inside the vehicle. I brought Max Tracks along. I ended up needing them. Another Grenadier I was with got stuck, and it's like they're trying to talk about the winch and do this or whatever. I'm like, guys, let's just take 3 seconds.
Just throw those down. Yeah.
It was like done. So it was so fast. So I was really glad I had those along, even though I never needed to use them in anger myself. But they were nice to have along. So yeah, and then just having the basics of tools, the basics of tire repair, that gave me a lot of confidence, because I only had one spare. Never used it. Oh, that's another interesting thing. So I think this is more luck than anything else. But during all of these circumnavigations, all of these continental crossings, I used BF Goodrich tires. And I don't think that BF Goodrich necessarily makes the best tires on the planet. Yeah. It just so happens that I used BF Goodrich for all of it.
Yeah. Wasn't planned.
Wasn't planned. And other than Antarctica, we had to use some specialty tires. But I actually, when I rolled up to Djibouti, I realized, like, I've never had a flat with a BF Goodrich tire crossing all these continents. And I was like, it's going to happen right here in Djibouti City, right on my way.
Yeah.
And it didn't. I ended up finishing the trip, so crossing 6 out of the 7 continents with BF Goodrich, not a single flat for the entire time.
Cool.
So that's kind of cool. So
maybe you don't need that double spare.
Well, I think some people do. I think some people are very distracted drivers. So if someone gets a lot of flats, if you watch their driving behavior, they tend to not pay attention that close to things in the road, or they tend to like move, or they're on their phone. They tend to be really distracted drivers. So they tend to get really close to the edges, or they get out of the tracks, and they tend to have more flats that way in general.
I could see on like some of the stuff in Australia where you're properly out there, maybe carrying a second.
Yeah, that could be, and it would be easy. It would have been easy for me to throw that on the roof rack. I had space for a second spare on the roof rack just in case I needed it. And one last thing, we did change out the rear spring on the Grenadier in Kenya, in Nairobi, to what is the current model spring. So the vehicle that I took delivery of had X spring, and in Africa they delivered Y spring, and now in America and pretty much everywhere else they deliver Y spring. So I upgraded, and I'm using X and Y because I don't know the numbers. So I upgraded from the spring that was in it to a new one. It's about 30 millimeters taller, and it has a little bit more load capacity, so the vehicle sat better with a full load. So anybody who's bought a Grenadier, you don't need to upgrade the spring. It already came with it. The one that I drove, since it was so early, didn't have it. So that was the one change that I made throughout the trip.
It's pretty small.
Yeah, and it wasn't a failure. It was
you had a very, very, like, I'm not going to call them pre-production, but
it's pretty close.
Like, it was a media car from.
Yeah, it was pretty close.
So. Yeah,
but it just shows their commitment to making a great vehicle. But
it's cool to see feedback already.
Yeah, so that was, we could talk for hours about Africa, but it was just a joy to do it. So.
Yeah. Well, be sure to check out all of the other more detailed podcasts on this segment. This is a good overview. Hopefully this will kind of encourage people to go see this wonderful continent filled with wonderful people.
Yeah.
And
I know you're thinking about Africa soon.
I always want to go to Africa.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to get out. We're going to stop recording this podcast. I'm going to go look at flights. maybe here's how I'd love to end it. Africa is not that hard to do.
Yeah.
It from the outside seems very hard to do. It is very well set up for tourism. You know, I've never had any issues there,
Nope.
safety wise. But the reality is that you may not be doing a massive trip. But particularly Southern Africa, you can fly into any major airport and there are dozens, if not like more than that, of rental safari. They call them safari cars usually. And they're fully outfitted. Like we rented one in Namibia for a month, and I mean, it had the cups, it had the plates, it had the knives, and it was all nice stuff. And you can just go.
Yeah.
You don't even actually need the expensive ones. Like, I mean, genuinely, if you want to plan less and you're a little apprehensive of camping in foreign countries or whatever, rent a Hilux and go.
Yeah.
Rent a Fortuner. Like, you don't need to overthink it.
Yeah.
We would just drive around. Oh, where are we going to go tonight? Cool. Where are we going to stay? There you go. And it was always, I mean, it was wonderful. And
it's meant for
it's
it.
a lot. I don't want to like pontificate. Oh, and there we were on the 4th day, and it was so challenging. No, it was easy.
Yeah.
It was so easy.
Yep.
It's more work to find camping in the United States on iOverlander and where am I going to camp tonight or this or that or whatever. Like, it's easy. Like, go do it.
Yeah, there's nothing that I did on this trip that was particularly difficult.
Yeah.
It's accessible to everyone. You may not have the time, or you may not currently have the resources to do it, but nothing that I did required you to be an Uber overlander at all.
No.
So,
yeah, and as we said, once you get there, it is at least for Americans, it is more affordable than you would think.
Yeah.
And, you know, just consider it.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
well, thanks, Matt.
Yeah, it was a good one.
You got to interview me. I like that.
Heck yeah.
Awesome.
Chat with my buddies.
That's right. Well, we thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.